It's an issue that's been getting a lot of attention over the last few years, bullying. But bullies have been around forever, and they leave an undeniable, long-lasting impact on their victims. Now, one man is detailing his 40-year search for the boy who tormented him so long ago in a new book called Whipping Boy. It's a cross between memoir, thriller, and good old-fashioned investigative journalism. The author, Allen Kurzweil, joins me now. He's a novelist, a children's author, a journalist, a teacher, and an all-around fascinating guy. Allen, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's start off by talking about what happened to you at Eglon, this boarding school that you were at in Switzerland as a child.
In 1971, I was a 10-year-old kid, a scrawny Jewish boy from New York. My father had died when I was 5. And my mother was scrambling to reinvent herself, and she decided to become a professor. She needed to do some research in Italy, and so she looked around to find a place that would take care of me, and I think the ungenerous way of putting it is she warehoused me in this incredibly fancy boarding school in Switzerland for 1 year, and I found myself at the top of a dormitory tower with the bully of the title, the boy who made me his whipping boy. And
this is a setting with these beautiful views, right? Just gorgeous
dramatic
alpine vistas.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a more exquisite landscape. And it was peopled by royalty and the children of spies. Jackie Stewart, the race car driver's kids, went there. It was a very lavish environment. For a middle-class kid who was taking the bus to school, it was a mind-boggling new environment.
So who was Caesar, your tormentor, and what did he do to you? Or what types of things? I'm not asking for a complete list because there's a lot. But.
No, that would take the entire show. But Caesar was at the time a 12-year-old boy from the Philippines, so he had 2 years and about 30 or 40 pounds on me. And he displayed a particularly gifted manner in which to torment and humiliate me. So, for example, he saturated little pieces of bread with hot sauce and forced me to eat them. Obviously, he called me any number of names. It was the first time in my life I learned the word kike. He called me nosy. And most dramatically, but by no means the most painful experience, was the time he tied me up to a bedpost and whipped me to the then hit Broadway musical Jesus Christ Superstar.
And he was involved, you believe, in the disappearance or the theft of a watch that your deceased father, had given you, correct?
That's right. That was probably the motive force behind the entire desire to find out what happened to Caesar and to confront him and say, why did you do those things? The watch was my totem. It was the most valuable keepsake I had. My dad had died when I was 5. He was a Viennese Jew who had emigrated and become a rather gifted mechanical engineer. So he cherished all things mechanical. And he bestowed that love of devices and Rube Goldberg contraptions and watches on me. Mm-hmm. When I went to that school as a 10-year-old, I pleaded with my mother that I could take Dad's watch. Reluctantly, she agreed. And I carried that watch on my wrist at all times, except, of course, when I was showering. Came back from the shower room one day, the watch was gone. And I subsequently learned that Caesar and his sidekick had, and this is my memory of the events, conspired to launch the watch out the window, and it was never found again.
So a lot of people have traumatic things happen to them in childhood, and we maybe don't let them go. We remember them, but we don't seek closure in the way that you ended up seeking closure. Talk briefly about what made you decide to track Caesar down, and that's a tale too, which is just incredibly convoluted and highly improbable. Why did you try to find him?
Well, it was an itch I needed to scratch. I think all of us wonder at one time or another what happened to our childhood bullies. Very few people, for whatever reason, act upon it. And it was my wife who pushed me to not only ask the question, but seek an answer. And we were walking through a museum. I saw this artwork of a flagellation scene of Jesus Christ. It transported me straight back to that trauma of the dormitory room, and 2 or 3 years later, I went back to the school to see if I could find him. I didn't at the time. It took me many years later to actually track him down.
So there were a bunch of starts and stops in your search, but along the way you found out that Caesar had become involved in some criminal activity, some of which was totally bizarre, right? Impersonating royalty, part of a group of con men.
The prosecutor who sent Caesar Augustus to jail along with his confederates characterized the scam as Dirty Rotten Scoundrels meets Clue. They rented suites at the Waldorf Astoria. They dressed up and made claims to being royals. Prince Robert von Badisch von Bronckhorst was assisted by a former assistant store manager from a Radio Shack in Queens who claimed to be Colonel Sherry. And together, they conspired to dupe dozens of people out of millions of dollars. And along the way, they managed to dupe Clifford Chance, largest law firm in the world, Merrill Lynch, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So it was an extraordinary scam. And the roper, the principal shill for this entire operation, was the boy who tied me up in the boarding school in Switzerland.
So your man, Caesar, when you locate him, you have this sort of protracted exchange with him in which you do not say, Caesar, here's what I remember you doing to me when I was 10 years old. But eventually you tell him, Caesar, this is what you did to me. What was his response?
That was, without a doubt, the hardest moment in the whole inquiry. I could stare Caesar in the face and say, and tell him that I knew of his entire extensive criminal life, not only as a con man, but as a drug smuggler in Norway that sent him to jail for 2 years. But to be able to say, you did a number on me, to be able to channel the 10-year-old boy I was nearly impossible. When I finally did that, he looked at me blankly. He had no clue who I was, or so he said. And I believe him, by the way. I believe that he has a defense mechanism of amnesia that allows him to liberate himself from any culpability whatsoever. Caesar has been and always will be the victim.
I would love to ask you about 10 more questions because this is such fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'll just tell people they should go pick up the book. Allen Kurzweil, thank you.
Thank you very much.